Hi everyone, we're here, It's a Continent, and this is our first kind of live interview. And yeah, we are here with Juliana. So yeah, we just thought we'd have a catch up, talk about podcasting, a book that we've been mentioning a couple of times, but we haven't really been talking about it that much. Really. No, not that much.
What book?
But yeah, honestly, I'm so excited to have this conversation and just catch up.
Yes.
Wow, where do I start? Like, I feel like I'm just taking over right now.
Please do.
So I'm sure, like, first of all, congratulations on the podcast, the book launch. Like, it's so incredible to see the evolution. Like, amazing. So yeah, congrats.
Never expected it.
Surreal. Surreal is the word, definitely. Over the past 2 years, it's definitely the word.
2 years. For those of the listeners who don't know, like, who It's a Continent is, who you guys are, like, can you just, obviously this feels a bit weird because it's on your pod.
But I think we can reintroduce ourselves.
Always reintroduce.
Because now you've got our faces. It's all technical and digital out here. So I'm Astrid.
And I'm Chinny.
And we've been doing It's a Continent podcast for 2 years. We started it just a little bit before lockdown. The whole COVID happened, but it's really helped us, actually. I don't think how we would have survived the COVID years without having the podcasts and stuff. But we focus on African history. So we take a country and then discuss a particular moment in its history and say, what was going on in there. And our listeners get to learn alongside us because we're not historians. No. We learn as we go. Yeah.
Let's take it back to before the podcast. How did you two meet? Unless you did meet during COVID.
Imagine too much activity. So we met 2015.
2015, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Internship, the Black Nod. The Black Nod.
That is,
has really sealed our fate in a positive way. So we looked across the table, the only two black girls. You know how it is. White spaces, internships. And you're like, you do the little nods.
And that was it.
That was literally it. The nod sealed the friendship.
Sealed it.
Really? We've just, been in contact since.
Wow.
Literally.
So then I'm assuming you ended up living with each other?
Yeah, we lived together.
In Reading.
Worked in the same company.
Yep.
Then I followed her again.
Worked with another company.
And we've just kept in touch and have always wanted to have a project together. And I think, it just perfect time. I don't know what, I know it sounds so much like a film where people are like, oh my gosh, it was all about the timing. But honestly, it was really good timing in terms of where we were at and what we wanted to do, and just like beyond the sort of like day job and having that sense of like just creativity, because we're quite creative people.
Because I always was like, okay, I was writing stuff like magazines and things, but when Astrid said, should we do a podcast, I was like, well, that's why I bought my Mac, like, obviously. Like, I'd bought my Mac like years ago, being like, one day, I'm not sure what on, but you never know. So it literally was a bit like the Jacob Zuma meme, like the
you have to bring it to some sort of meme. She'll make a meme reference and a football reference.
It was Jacob Zuma, it just aligned.
Where are you actually from? It's a Continent is about, obviously, dispelling the notion that Africa is a continent. So where on the continent do you guys come from?
Yep. So like many other people, is it 1 in 5? I don't know what the stat is now because it's getting crazy. But yes,
probably 1 in 2.
Nigerian. Yes. Half Edo State and half Abia State. So half Igbo, half Edo. Nice. Which is not a common combination, I must say, but
still Nigerian.
What about you, Astrid?
So I'm Congolese, so from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and but grew up in Devon. So as my mum liked to say, we were one of the first few black people there. It's not accurate, but
it probably is, because I think we're one of the first few black people in South End, to be honest.
Oh, okay, I'll claim it then as my historical moment.
Probably.
But that's me really.
Do you think you guys living in places that weren't predominantly, I guess, diverse has given you a sort of different angle to this topic of Africa as a continent and the richness of it?
I think it's because we heard it a lot more where we were, because we did get the comment. I did get the comments about, is it a jungle? What was that?
Oh, have you like lions?
That's a lot more common in those environments, I think. So it's a bit more heightened than you already are exposed to that. You don't have to wait until you start a full-time job to be exposed to microaggressions. Like, they literally start in your 5, which is quite dramatic. Actually, it's not funny.
Yeah, it's actually we're used to it.
Yeah, now I'm like, oh, microaggression. Okay, like, here we go again. But yeah, I think it probably heightened our feelings towards wanting people to, like, that educating piece, really, because it just highlighted how the education system has essentially failed because people are still asking us these questions.
So, I guess you guys have like a, what's it called when you have a good rapport with each other?
Yeah, definitely. I think we balance kind of each other in terms of like, I think we do, right? Yeah. I feel like, I think it's a really nice balance that we create with it, and we always kind of like check in with each other and the other person. So I think it's really helpful to have someone who is that, because I feel like doing this podcast with someone who was exactly the same as me would drive me mad.
Oh yeah.
So it's nice to have someone who's different and can actually say, oh, what about this? And like, oh gosh, I was about to go all corporate, be like, positively challenged, but no, like in a really good way, because we're both like, do you know what, we never expected it to get to where we are now. And when we started it, we were very much like, we get our friends and family to listen to it, we get to learn. And I think that's the good thing about it. It wasn't about putting out content for other people. It was content and information for us,
in a sense.
Yeah. And so it's so nice to see that it's resonated with so many other people. And that's what I like about it, is like the reason why we love it and the reason why we do it, especially combining with a full-time job, is the fact that we're learning and we're still enjoying learning about things, and we'll send each other stuff on social and text and stuff and be like, oh my gosh, you should cover this. So I think that's nice, and I think that's what's kind of
the passion behind
it just keeps it going. Yeah,
exactly.
You can definitely feel it. Like, I remember listening to your first episode, I was like, so like, I'm learning so much, but there's banter as well. Like, I'm laughing laughing as well. So would you say that that's the same in your friendship as well? Like, that level of banter?
Yeah. It's basically, because I think when we started it, because it basically was like, probably let's do a podcast. Chinny took out her laptop and started like writing things and researching courses and how we can like get the right tools and equipment and stuff. But I do think like, our relationship has really helped kind of like the process. It's a bit like when Chinny and I watch a documentary, we love a documentary. We have a glass of wine. And then we're literally just like throwing shade.
So
and like, that's basically what you experience in the pod is me and Chinny watching a documentary and just like
just go for
it. Yeah, that's basically it.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I've got some questions here actually, so if I'm looking down.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the process of moving from audio to the written word. So translating that sort of lightheartedness, but also a level of seriousness about history. Talk to me about how that translated into you guys writing the book.
So, like, in terms of the process, even within the podcast, we do script the podcasts to a degree. So it was similar in a sense, because yes, we normally would script the podcast anyway, but now we're like, oh, we actually have to like reference. Like, I have to go, like, what's Harvard? Like, we had to actually go back and do all of that kind of stuff.
Throw back to uni.
Yeah, just really make sure that it's properly, like, not that, I mean, hey, it's all factual on our podcast, I must say, but it's just like the proper like due diligence when it comes to writing things. And then also finding some topics remain the same, other topics have been changed just because of their relevance. And the podcast is quite different because it can be quite reactive. So, for example, we decided to do that oil episode because we saw a documentary on coca production in Ghana. We were like, oh, we need to like, this is like another example of this kind of behaviour. Whereas with the book, you're like, oh, okay, well, when you decide, it's kind of stuck, isn't it? You can't update it unless you like have another issue. So the podcast is more reactive than the book, but the book's still like a good
it's definitely a good entry point.
Definitely.
And I think that's something with like both the podcast and the book, we never claim it to be like an encyclopedia. No. There's Wikipedia out there, guys. You know what I mean? I can give you, we can, the notes. We'll have like a little link insert.
Yeah, I mean, I've been at Wikipedia wormhole.
Yeah, you like can.
11 p.m. I'm on Wikipedia.
Yeah, like, there's YouTube channels. Do you know what I mean? We're not that. There's a lot of good resources out there, but it's about the things that interest us, the things that we get from listeners that interest us. We're like, oh,
yeah, the listeners as well.
That we really like that. So send it to us. I think, was it the Chagos Islands that we got researched?
So we had a listener that sent us a whole piece on the Chagos Islands, and she was like, these are my Kindle notes. These are, these are some articles I've read about this. This is a documentary you can watch. And she was like, I know that you guys can just string together an episode. And that's how how that came about.
So if you fancy doing that, then we're also open. Yeah, because I think it's a really nice, because I was like, when we got it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is super, like, this is what we do. And for someone to send it and be like, you guys are doing it, so fancy putting this together in a podcast. We're like, well, yeah, we feel like people need to learn about this, and we're learning. So yeah, honestly,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas within the book form, it's slightly different, because then you sometimes the topics you're like, okay, it's got to be quite decisive, or it not necessarily reactive in that sense, but it's more similar than you think, just because of the scripting aspect of the podcast.
No, that makes sense. I was going to say, how does it feel to know that there's people like engaging with what you guys are sharing? Just in general, actually.
Freaks me out a little bit. Only because I'm like, when people are like, oh my gosh, I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and someone was like, oh, you're that girl who does It's a Continent podcast. I was like, you're like, yeah, but I'm so like...
Someone said that to me at recess, and I was very scared. Really? Oh my God.
As you can tell, we're very pro at this podcast a lot. We're very good at it. But yeah, it honestly surprises me. And I'm like, because it's basically just having a chat with Chinny and I, and it doesn't feel like there's other people listening. Does that make sense? And so I just feel like, oh yeah, no, we've got that chat booked in, 6:30. Yeah, we'll be focusing on this country, and this is the topic. We'll go through it, record it, and then it kind of goes out there. So that's the kind of point where my brain stops with it. I don't know about you.
And then you forget, because then the next morning you're like, oh, the episode is out. Then you look, and you're like, oh, like many people have already listened. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, we did release that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really nice to know that lots of people are learning along with us, and as Astrid said before, it's the interaction that we have with our listeners, and the whole, like, here are some topics, and we do like topic polls on our Instagram all the time, and we get a lot of suggestions, and that's actually how we plan our episodes, to be honest. We can kind of crowdsource the topics from our audience.
So good. Back to the process of the book. Where and where did you write? Did you write together? Did you write separately? Like, what was the vibe when it came to the actual writing process?
So we split it, but we wrote, we kind of decided and kind of had thoughts on kind of topics that we wanted to cover and things. And so then we would do like little check-ins and go on retreats and things. It is intense, because I don't even know how we got through it, because it was like working full time. You then have the podcast, because we still wanted to keep that up.
Keeping it up.
You then have to write the book, and as part of the book, there's a whole other process around like getting yourself out there and like answering questions around like, what do you want the cover to look like? And all of a sudden you're thinking, I didn't even think about that. I'm just thinking about writing. So it's just, there's so many other bits and pieces. So I feel like we did really well in terms of how we split it, but then actually being able to question each other's kind of writing, because we write slightly differently as well. So it was nice to kind of then find a middle ground between that. So I think it was a nice way of, because I think we would have been writing it forever if we both wrote it at the same time.
Together. Because like at the beginning, I'd say it was more separate, because once we decided our topics, then you would then like write separately, and then as you get closer to the end of the process, you then become more collaborative, because you have to find like a common voice between the two of us. But then it's like not too much this way, not too much that way. It's kind of like a middle point, because we really didn't want the tones to sound off.
Yeah, because it would have sounded very...
Initially, it sounded very off.
Yeah,
so it was around like...
Well, one of us is quite formal.
I'll let you guess.
It was moments where you're like, are we actually going to be using that word?
I'm just like, it is not a dissertation.
I didn't get to write one, so I kind of felt the need. I was like, okay, I'm going to make this happen, guys. I'm finally writing. Yeah. So
wow. How did you like balance writing with working, your secret job, and everything in between? Like, how did you balance all of that? Because it seems to have happened like so super quickly.
It was very quickly.
Very quick.
To be honest, like, it sounds a bit weird, but lockdown kind of helped a bit because it cut off the social aspect, because I then didn't feel bad that I wasn't going out because there was nothing to go out to. So it kind of helped in that sense. It was that winter where I was just literally just right, because there was nothing else to do, right? So I don't know what would, if it was a typical, like, people out and about, I think it would be very hard, to be honest, to have turned it around that quickly.
Yeah.
How I don't think I asked this, but how did you get approached about writing the book? Like, how did you feel when you found out, or like, what was the process about?
Yeah, so I was just posting the podcast everywhere, as you do, and I posted on like this Facebook group, because I'm still on Facebook for the groups. Groups are good. Groups are good. So I was on like I think it was like a people of colour journalism type group, and I thought, okay, I might be able to get some guests or people interested. So I just posted, we have a podcast that's new and this is what we do. If anyone knows of anyone or anyone who wants to be a guest, like, please let me know, kind of thing. And then Joelle then commented, I love this podcast. Oh, that's nice. We've got someone who likes our podcast.
We still love those, so tell it, if you like it, please share it to us. We still get excited by that.
And then we then get I get a Facebook Messenger message, which, I mean, I'm not on Facebook Messenger like that, so I probably didn't see it for a while. Then I was like, she said, oh, really interested. Hi, like, I'm from Coronet, I'm interested in perhaps turning your podcast into a book. And I was like, wow, okay. So that screenshot sent to Astrid, and that was really it.
That was it, yeah.
Wow. Kind of took it from there, yeah.
What was the feeling like? How did you feel?
I mean, at the time it was... because we still had to do like a book proposal, etc. So it was a lot of hard work, and it was a bit like applying for a job that you like, just your life depends on it, that kind of thing, because that was what it felt like.
We just were like, oh,
like putting together the proposal and things like that. But
it was really just surprising, because we were just not even a year in.
We weren't even a year in.
We weren't even a year in.
No.
So we were just like, oh, we get to do this really cool creative thing called a podcast, and it's about history. So we were just like enjoying ourselves, and we're like, oh, it'll grow, we'll just like see how it goes.
Yeah.
So to be approached and actually be like, oh my gosh, people are actually, not in a bad way, obviously people listen because it's really good, but just be like, wow, like people are listening, and it resonates with them, and they're really enjoying it. And I think not just from like the publisher perspective, but also just some of the we went on BBC Radio Ulster.
Ooh,
yeah,
Ulster?
That's Northern Ireland.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It was,
we literally got approached.
It was a producer messaged us on Instagram or something, just being like, oh, my presenter really likes your show. So it was really like all completely different walks.
He was literally so the presenter, John Toll, was like, his son listened to our podcast and was like, Dad, you've got to have them on your podcast. And so for us, it's that element, it's that organic sort of like people sharing it between each other, because I guess that's how you find podcasts, right? And I think that's the bit that I quite like, that people are just finding it and being like, oh, it'd be quite nice to work with them, or they seem all right.
Wow, mad.
Yeah.
What was... Sorry, I feel like I'm like in school.
Yeah, no.
Can you read for me? What's the most shocking thing that you found out whilst researching a topic?
I think we did this topic in the book as well, but the Namibia genocide, someone had messaged us to cover it, and I thought, I'm not sure what that is, and I googled it, and when we're doing like the research and everything, and it's just very eerie to see how much it foreshadows the Holocaust to come, and the fact that it was essentially genocide inflicted by Germany within German's colonial forces within Namibia, and it's really, really dark. And it's something that should actually be explained in context, within the context of World War II, but isn't. And what was nice is that we got a message from a teacher. I can't remember whether she was in the UK or not, actually, but she did mention that she was telling her students about Namibia and what happened there within the context of World War II, which is really interesting because it just shows how the curriculum is slowly and surely being like shaped by what we do. So yeah, because it all then makes more sense, and it does become quite alarming when you realise that this isn't the first time that such a thing has taken place.
It's so interesting that you mentioned like loads of teachers have, you know, approached you, and I always explain to people when they say, oh, what's this continent about? I'm like, if I was back in school, like, this is the kind of stuff that I would need to have been listening to because it's so informative. But just off the cards question, did you guys study history like when you were growing up? Or was it ever
honestly, I'm the worst liar because my face literally gives everything away. And, like, I should practice that, but you know, no.
Really?
I have no history background. Yeah, more within the kind of marketing space is where I did it. But I've always had an interest in history. And so for me, it was quite a nice element to explore. And I think especially having grown up in Devon, where there wasn't a lot of and still isn't a lot of diversity, but if you fancy moving, feel free. That it was quite difficult for me. Like, you know, I didn't really come into London until I was about like in my early 20s, because it was just this big scary place where there were things like tubes, which I really didn't understand. And so for me, being able to like connect to that part of me, and it sort of feels like with the book, it is writing it for me, like you're saying around like that younger self, something that you really needed. So then when I was in history class and we're just going through discussing the world wars, I would sit there and be like, oh wow, there really were no black people in this world wars. Like, do you know what I mean? But it's not, you don't know because it's not an element that is given to you when you're learning history. So you kind of take what the teachers are saying at face value. So I'm like, well, they've not shared any stories about Africans, so well, there aren't any. But do you know what I mean? And so it's important to kind of highlight within this.
I did history GCSE.
All right, still holding on to the GCSE. All right,
A star. Thank you very much.
I did do sociology, that kind of counts,
but yeah, no, similar. I actually nearly took it to A level, but I had to choose between that and English Lit. So anyway, don't need to know about my educational history. Yeah, I did history in school, but again, focuses just on like the Tudors, you know, World War One, World War Two, no black people. Literally just no black people. There were no black people. Ancient Egypt, I don't think ancient Egypt counts. Because they're not really showing what was actually happening.
It's the closest we got.
Like nothing. So yeah, because it just reminds me of when there was like a project and it was like, oh, okay, everyone's grandparents have fought in World War, and you're just like,
triggering. I understand what teachers try and do with that project, but I don't think they realise for certain communities, like, right, what point do I get to? Because I really don't know.
Some of us don't even have family trees, so it's actually very. It's kind of
being conscious about that.
Because I feel like we've covered like book and podcast kind of merged together.
Yeah.
But yeah, just going off of the specific questions about the book, like who is behind it all? Who's the It's a Continent team? Like, talk to me. Sorry.
I love the fact that you use the word team. It's so like. We're part of a team. Does this count as line management responsibility?
Directors.
The
two directors.
This is the team of the podcast. This is the podcast team. The podcast team is Shid and I.
It's the two of us. It can be quite tough because it's like indie podcast and all that stuff, isn't it? But it's good fun.
Yeah. So all the emails, messages.
That's why we're so slow.
We're aiming to get past that.
How have your family, your friends, your community, your neighbours, we've spoken about, you know, the listeners, like, myself included. But how have they responded to you, like, with the podcast and now the book? How have they responded to everything?
It was really positively, and it was quite funny. So I went back to my hometown in Devon and stuff, and was catching up with like school friends that I'd grown up with and things, and like they were like, Astrid, we always knew you'd do something like this. I was like, yeah, right. Do you know what I mean? And
we always knew you'd be great.
Yeah, you always knew. Like, I'm signing everything, guys. Don't worry. But they were like, because when I moved to the UK, like, had no words of English. My French was impeccable, but now it's terrible. And they were the kind of my first kind of friends in Devon that kind of taught me how to like learn English and things like that. And they were like, literally the only words you knew were like hello and goodbye, and now you're writing a whole book in like your second language. I was like, yeah, that is pretty wild, isn't it? So when I think about that, when I literally couldn't string a sentence together, and now we're like, got a whole book with my name on it. So yeah, that's not, it feels like such an achievement. And yeah, it's really big.
Yeah. I don't have a story.
Yeah, Chini was just all, she had English down from day dot, so
unfortunately.
Some of us, but no one ever quizzed me on my French.
Yes. But yeah, no, it's been nice to see lots of like messages of support from different sort of areas of life, just in general, like school friends, like work colleagues, family, obviously, friends. So yeah, it's just really nice to see the reception we've got so far. It's not even out yet, so
let's talk about the tone of the book. I know we touched on it earlier, but did you draw from any writing in like references whilst writing, or was it just a case of this is the podcast, this is what we're about, and we're gonna write?
We sort of kept it close to the podcast.
I think it's close to the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some bits of shade that had to be removed because of
Chini got a bit too shady.
I think I got a bit too shady. I didn't want to.
The shade control was on.
The whole libel and all this defamation had to be removed.
Okay.
So, whereas we could say it on the podcast, which is ironic.
But you want someone to listen to it and be like, we're gonna.
So it's okay. I won't repeat it. But yeah, we kept it as close to the podcast as we could, whilst also making it an informative book, because I think it's more of getting the information down. So yeah, you will see like little quips, little bits of shade. So it will be a bit similar, but I would say it's also more informative.
Yeah.
Not that the podcast isn't, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's just more. Yeah, you could say more, explore more. Yeah.
Do you have any specific chapters that you're excited for your audience or readers to get into?
For me, it's when I was reading the audiobook, there were bits that I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You're like, I can't wait for someone to read that.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to a question around like some of my favourite, our favourite kind of like episodes.
Yeah.
For me, Egypt, because we always talk about
those pyramids.
Yeah. Chidi never wants to approach it from a pyramid perspective, so we never will. That's been vetoed. So we always try it, especially when it comes to Egypt and places that I think people are quite familiar with. We try and find an angle that's slightly different. And so with that, one of my favorite, because I think it was Doria Shafiq. So she's a woman that we explore as part of Egypt, and that was just learning about her story. Was incredible, guys. Honestly, find out who this woman is. She was a fantastic trailblazer of her time. And so for me, that's one of the kind of episodes. And actually, I think throughout the book, there are elements where we do try and bring in kind of women and their stories, because I do think we try and make a conscious effort to really think about, okay, a lot of history is very much like male dominated. And so we don't want to lose the fact that there were women voices within that. So in some chapters where we have like got a story, we always try and find a way to kind of embed kind of what was the role of women, were there specific women that we can highlight and things like that. So I think that's some of the things that I'm really excited about, and just people just getting a bit of insight and be like, I'm going to go home and purchase another book, or I'm going to go home and Google that, or read this journal or whatever. So yeah,
quite similar. So I've got the March on Grand Bassam, which was really, really good.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was Côte d'Ivoire. So that's like a women's uprising against the colonial government, and yeah, it just shows an example of women mobilising back during colonial times, which I think is pretty important.
What was your favourite part about writing the book? Did you have a favourite part of the process or part of the writing?
I think the time when we saw it in all formatted on PDF was like, because we'd been working on Word and stuff and had a folder system, colour coding, all of this stuff. And I think we'd been reading it together and I felt like that was starting to feel like, oh, we're doing this thing. But I think the first time that I saw it on a PDF on my screen and I was like, I think we're writing a book. It just confirmed it for me that I was like, I think for me that was that moment.
Yeah.
Would you say the same for you, Chinny?
Yeah, I think so. I also quite like the Airbnbs though. They were quite nice.
Oh, we really, I feel like we spent a lot of detail in terms of selecting the Airbnb.
I got a good deal. Made friends with the owner.
What was that place? What was
in Tunbridge Wells?
Tunbridge Wells. Oh my gosh, there isn't it. Ask us where it is. We'll send it to you because
send you the link.
Wow,
William, my guy. Yeah, honestly,
literally, they had. It was like kind of a flat.
There
were
two flats.
Two flats.
Yeah.
And they both had like different themes. So when we booked it, we booked the first time when we went to, I think
the
it was
Regal one.
Yeah, we went to kind of the Regal one. We were like, oh my gosh, we love this. Honestly, absolutely stunning. And then we were like, okay, let's try the next flat. So the next retreat,
the house of selfies.
We booked the house of selfies. It had like a bathtub in the living room and dining area.
Wow.
Like it was incredible. We will hook you up if you fancy going to Tunbridge Wells.
Drop us a DM.
Yeah, we'll send it to you because honestly, really amazing. Yeah, really good.
You guys have mentioned these retreats. Like, what did that look like for the writing process? Like, was it like, it sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like, what I have in my head, but paint me a picture.
Yeah, so like some of the early stays were really around just actually finishing off the writing, and then the later ones were really around just like reading it out loud and making sure that the voice was the same. Checking the copy editor stuff. So yeah, it kind of varied to the different processes. So when we're still working relatively separately in the earlier stages, we just like separate and just write in different rooms, etc. And then as the process nears to a close, then we then kind of, it's a lot more collaborative. There were also lots of days at the British Library.
Yeah. A lot of Chinny saying like, do you want to read another chapter?
Yeah.
And it's like 11:30 at night and you're like,
yeah, I have to do that. Yeah.
She's my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. And the British Library is weird because it's the only library I know that you can't actually take the books out. So if you want to borrow a book, you have to stay there until you finish the book.
Oh wow.
And some of those rooms are cold.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. You can't bring water.
You can't take water.
You can't take water.
You can't take water. You can't take water. You can't take a pen. You can't take pens. The man even once was like, "You're not really allowed creams," and I was like, "Excuse me,
serious?
You want me to be ashy?" He was like, "You're not really supposed to take cream." It's just like,
I remember. I think the bit that I found most shocking is like as you're walking out and you've put your books back, you have to open up your laptop.
Yeah.
Why are people ripping up pages in books?
Yeah, apparently people put pages in their laptops, or they'll try and take the book home because it's a library, but you can't take the books home. Yeah, because the first time I went, I was like, yes, sir, I can take it home, right? No,
you gotta stay here.
What's that? That's why we have a reading room.
Yeah. Do you not see all of these people?
All these people that are here.
Yeah, it's not out of choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was.
It was wild. Yeah.
What was the most challenging part of the writing process?
I think it's coming up with topics for certain countries. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to disrespect them. But some of these countries...
I don't want to disrespect. Thank you. This is why we had to tone certain elements down of Chinny.
No.
We would have been in courts.
No, some of these countries, you're just like, what has redacted? Like, it's difficult to find a topic. You're like, oh man, like, this is such a tiny country. Like, what? And because... the situation lends to itself because say if they don't speak English, for example, or it's so small, the history isn't even documented that's accessible to us here in the UK, for example. So it is the system essentially. But some countries you're like, wow, it really took us a long time to come up with some topics, or like I had to scrape, had to look at a topic by using Google Translate on a web page, on a book, to get the source that I needed. So or like pre-colonial topics. It's really, it's the problem that we're trying to solve that actually like came back to bite us a little bit, because there's just there was nothing on some countries, and that's through no fault of their own. No. It's just because of the problem that we have.
How many drafts did it take for you to get to the final masterpiece?
Oh gosh,
it might be 6.
It's quite a few
5 or 6.
Yeah, quite a few drafts.
A lot.
Yeah.
Did you have to like majorly cut down, or was that part of the editing process?
It's just as we went along, because we didn't want, and I think with the podcast, it's not about detailing every single moment that happened within this period of time. Else we would be writing an encyclopedia.
That's it. You don't want it to sound like
so we always try to kind of provide quite there's elements of detail, but high level enough that you feel like, yes, you understand what was going on at the time, but this person's story is this. And I think it's always kind of, I don't know, I kind of see it as a book is very much your starting point. So it's not like here's absolutely everything you need to know. It's kind of taking that in and like, oh, actually, I didn't know this. Let me go off and listen to the podcast because it's amazing. Or let me go off and do my own research. And I think that...
Were there any like topics in particular or themes that you were excited to dive into yourselves?
I think the pre-colonial stuff is always interesting. Yeah, because it's always a challenge, and we always say this on the podcast, to try and get something that's concrete and says this is what was happening. But I think we always try and make a conscious effort to show stuff pre-colonial, because things around colonization, hey, it's all documented, it's all here's what happened, and it's, you know, you're trying to create a balance. And I think we do try and make an effort to bring some more pre-colonial stuff within this. That I think is also an element I'm really excited for people to just find out about.
We try to include lots of pre-colonial examples of pre-colonial leaders, and how African leaders should be also looked at in the same multifaceted way that European ones are. So like Alexander the Great, for example, he was never condemned for having ambition of wanting more land or wanting to conquer more, whereas some African leaders, well, find out in the book, but we discuss in one chapter, we talk about how Samari, he was a leader, the French used that against him to say, he wants to colonize you, like come to us, which is ironic, you know. So it's just interesting to see the different behaviours of African leaders pre-colonialism.
Talk to me about the book launch. Like, when is the book officially launching? And how are you guys celebrating as well? Like, I want to know the details.
So it is out, hardback, ebook, audiobook, 7th of July. So yes, that is 7th of July. I'm going to start marking that as well. Yeah. And we have both taken the day off.
Amazing.
I'm doing my hair first thing in the morning.
Oh yeah, she's doing her hair first thing in the morning. We're still trying to figure out how the two of us, like, we want to celebrate. And want to do something to mark it, or just like sleep.
Spa.
Yeah, just it'll be pretty chilled. And then we've got a couple of events in July, so we will be sharing a bit more information. It'll be on our website, but also on our socials, that you guys can join and kind of take part. Because I think the great thing about having our podcast is that it's sort of the listeners who have kind of helped it get to this point. And so we want to make sure that you guys get to experience it and be part of the book as well. So we will be amazing if you guys can join us. There's a couple of events we're doing in July, September, and also there's some in October. So if you can't make one, don't worry.
There's more.
We've got you covered. We've got others.
There might be more coming.
Might be more. So so that's how we're kind of spending time just discussing it, celebrating it. We're kind of doing the rounds, and you'll be seeing us and hearing us in different places and stuff. So it's exciting. It's exciting that it's coming through.
Is it like, do you get emotional like knowing that this precious baby that you've been working on for some time is finally being shared with everyone?
It is. So even when we talk about it, I think it just feels like
it still feels so surreal. That
it feels so surreal.
To feel emotional.
Yeah, I feel like during the first launch, I will probably, I'm not going to put it out. I did start a notes page with a speech, not going to lie. I did.
Okay, well, you can deliver that then.
Oh, yeah. I have nothing to say. So I'll be doing a speech for both of us.
Yeah, please.
Probably not reflective of both of our thoughts, but hey. But yeah, I feel like when that happens and having like our friends, family and listeners in the same space, that when I've been thinking about it, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, that for me is the bit that's kind of like, oh wow, we actually did this.
But what do you want your readers to think or feel after reading your book? Like, what do you hope that they will gain after reading the book?
I really hope that our listeners, like our readers who perhaps are of African heritage, would feel a sense of pride. That's what I would certainly hope to feel. And that, you know, readers from other backgrounds feel educated and also proud, because it is also like the rest of human history. It's just that Africa's history has been like cast in the shadows, but actually we should be proud of what the continent has contributed to the world on a wider scale, and that's kind of what we want to highlight from this book. So yeah, that's what I would say, and just challenging perceptions.
I think for me it's about people just really understanding the complexity and the challenges which different nations within the continent have gone through, in terms of really also explaining the way in which they currently are in certain nations.
Exactly.
And I think having that understanding in terms of just the depth of the involvement, because I think when we were recording the audiobook and stuff, the comment was made about like, wow, there is so much stuff that countries like Britain did that we think we know, in terms of just like how they present themselves. You're not quite sure, and it's kind of this savior complex, but actually just honing on the reality, but also realizing that there were really wonderful leaders as well, African leaders, both men and women, who really pushed to make changes. And I think sometimes it's about the starting point around changing our narrative and impacting that. And I think that's what I'd like people to take away with it. That is such a complex, there's so many different elements to this story. It's just not just one way, and we're not just sort of like, well, they got colonized and now, well, no, there is so much complexity to our story. It goes beyond colonization. And yeah, that's what I hope people take away from it. And that they love it also.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. Like, yeah, amazing. What next? What is the continent? What next for Astrid and Chinny? Are we going to get a documentary? Are we going to get a film?
We're manifesting. We are two huge documentary fans. That would be, for me, for both of us, we would be like, I don't even have words. Yeah. To do documentaries out there would be
traveling the continent,
seeing different African nations, and really beginning to, there is definitely documentation, but stronger kind of documenting and kind of revealing even more insight, because I think It's a Continent in this kind of stage one is very much about giving kind of a high level understanding and a starting point, but I think being able to delve deeper and actually going and telling that story through documentaries.
Yeah, being able to talk to more people from the continent as well, something we've been doing on our podcast, speaking to for example Farida Nabarema from Togo. We're just hearing and amplifying more African voices because their stories need to be told, and it's quite nice because even when, for example, when we did the Cameroon episode and Namibia too, we had comments from people from those countries saying, you know, thanks for telling our story, because they're just not really covered. So yeah, just really amplifying the voices of those within the continent would be great. Yeah.
Amazing. You know that I'm always so gassed when I'm episode, that I'm so happy to be here. So thank you for asking.